let me say what an honor it is to be here. And I mean that truly. When I first came to Unity last fall, first service, I knew that this is where I needed to be. And it's just great to see each and every one of you here. From my perspective, each and every one of you represents to me a divine aspect of God shining back to me. But also, each and every one of you represents something within me that's shining back, okay? And so it's with that perspective that I see things and I talk about things. I was fortunate at a very young age to have a minister, Levering Evans, who taught me how to meditate when I was like 9 or 10. And this has been a very powerful ally and tool for me my entire life. He called it quiet time, but he was a Southern Baptist minister, and he was very unique. We met in the late 50s and early 60s with a black congregation twice a year. They would come meet with us, and we'd go meet with them and worship. And this was before Martin Luther King was on the forefront of news, before civil rights was part of the consciousness of people. So he was a very progressive kind of guy. He also taught that if there was, for example, somebody in a tribal community who never heard the name of Jesus, that if he sincerely thought or sought the will of God, that he could be saved. Again, really progressive stuff. So my understanding of things was formed in that environment. I also at that time had a black nanny who was named Irene, and she was a great source for me. I loved her. I was a very, very young fellow, and she showed me an awful lot of love. And Irene, when we went to worship at the church there with her, she would always knit, and she'd dip snuff and spit. And she had a blue Maxwell House coffee can. I'll never forget it to this day. That's what she would do. And I remember one day we were sitting there, and I would always sit next to her. But the minister of that church was a fire and brimstone kind of guy. He really was. And I remember this particular service just like it was yesterday. I was really small, very, very tiny boy, and he was talking about the end times and asking how long. He said, men have always asked how long? How long? How long before the end times? Well, the Bible tells us that we will know how long when a creature will come up out the water. He'll have 7 heads with the face of a lion and the body of a serpent. Well, I was like this. And I looked over at Irene, and she was just knitting. I said, Irene, aren't you scared? She said, no, boy, he's talking about Albert. I was married to that son of a gun for 10 years. He doesn't scare me at all. Well, I was like that because I knew I had heard something profound. I knew it, okay? And that's how I was. It took me a long time to figure out what it meant, but I'll share that with you a little bit. So we'll come back to Irene a little bit later. So let's get on to Buddha. I want to recognize that for a Christian church to even allow this in their church, much less to talk about it, I will tell you represents elevated thought. Elevated thought. To recognize the oneness of God, and as Zita so talked about today, we worship God with all faiths, all religions. We recognize that God's light and love shines equally on all paths, right? So this is very elevated thought just to allow this to be here. And I will also tell you, I have studied many different holy texts throughout my life. As a very young man, I read the Bhagavad Gita. I've read the Thakora. I've read the Zohar, Upanishads, the Vedas, and of course the Old Testament, the Jewish Tanakh. I've read the Gospels, obviously, and the Quran. And I will tell you this. There are no words that I can tell you and speak that would express how much the words of Jesus have been made more plain and clearer and more real in my life by reading these different holy texts and looking for the truth in them. Any text you read, I don't care whose, whether it's ours or anyone else's, if you look to find a lie or look to find something to offend you or look for division, it's there. In our Bible, it talks about slavery, how to treat your slaves. It talks about selling your daughter into servitude. It talks about taking a disobedient child and stoning him, having the elders stone him. And of course, many of these things are not part of our culture today. Women were not allowed to speak in the church back then, according to our New Testament. And today, of course, look at all the wonderful women who lead us and guide us, not the least of whom is our lovely minister here, and of course, Zita. These voices of women are heard today, and you know, if I was not a Christian and I read that, I would say, well, I could be offended. If I say something to offend anybody, please forgive me. I don't mean to. I want to sort of broaden your understanding a little bit, and if I say something that offends you in any way or conflicts you, just take it and set it up on the back shelf and try to follow through what I'm trying to bring to you logically. So immense is the common teachings of Buddha and Jesus that there are books and theories and all kinds of things, a whole school of study about how Jesus may have gone to India or the Far East and studied some of these Eastern ideas. I have a couple books that were in my library. One is called The Parallel Sayings Between Jesus and Buddha, and it is just filled with sayings that are so common. Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit priest, he actually was one of the co-founders of the Jesuit priests, was a missionary also, and he went to Japan, and he met with Buddhist monks. And when he did, he was so astonished at the common teachings that he thought another missionary had been there before. He said, Luther must have beat me here, because Luther, the great reformer, the start of the Reformation, had this ideology of faith. The teachings are very, very similar. And I'll just give you some examples. I can imagine that Xavier was sitting there talking to his Chinese counterpart monk, and he would say things like, a foolish man built his house upon the sand. This is a saying of Jesus. The Buddhist monk said, yes, Buddha said, perishable is a city built on sand. Same thing. So Xavier said, in him, in Jesus, we have redemption through his blood and the forgiveness of sin. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Buddha said, let all sins that were committed in this world fall on me, that the world may be delivered. So Xavier would go on and say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Your Jesus is Buddha too. Buddha said, consider others as yourself. And the list just goes on and on and on. There are schools of thought and schools of study that do nothing but compare the teachings of Jesus and Buddha and how similar they are. There are writings where people say that Jesus, in those lost years, you know, Jesus was mentioned when he was 12 and then mentioned when he was 30, right? So there's a big span of time that's missing. There are many who think that Jesus went to the East and learned of some of the teachings of the East. And that's it can be the only reason maybe why these teachings are so similar. In John it says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. All things were created by him. Well, Om, according to Eastern thought, as I said before, is the first word out of the mouth of God to cause creation. The word Buddha in Sanskrit means light. The book of John says that the Christ is the light that lights the life of all men that come into the world. That's not just since Jesus was born, but all men from the beginning of time. You could not be except you are in God. There is no entity, there is no being, there is no thing, there is nothing that exists outside God. He is in all, of all, and through all. And we have our being in him. It's kind of like we are drops in the infinite ocean of light and love that is God. So when you begin to think in terms like this, and you think in terms of the oneness of God, the Prophet Muhammad made sure that he made clear there was only one God. There is no deity outside of him. There's no polytheistic idea. The oneness of God, the one side of the coin would tell you that there is only one God. But the other side of the oneness of God is that all that you see, all that you experience, this entire radiance around you is God being reflected back to you. And when you begin to take on these cognates and these thoughts and compare them to Buddha, there's this idea of mindfulness in Buddhist thought. Mindfulness means that when you look at something, like say these flowers right here, not only do you see the flower, but you see the water that allowed the flower to grow. You see the soil that it's planted in that nourished it. You see the sun that gave it life. You see the seed that caused the flower to bloom. You see the plant before the seed and all the water that came before. And pretty soon you begin to see the connectivity of everything, how everything is connected. We all are one. We all are one in this spirit of thought. There's this concept called Buddha essence, which means that the light of Buddha is in all things, just like the light of Christ. It is said that the Christ will fill all in our holy text. And this parallels the teachings of Buddha and Buddha essence. And science also, even though these scriptures were written 2,000 years ago, and in some cases 2,500, 3,000 years ago in the case of Buddha, science backs this idea of light being fundamental to all things. This Einstein's famous theory of E equals mc squared, it was that theory that allowed men to capture nuclear fission. And to give you an idea of how much light and energy there is in material, the equation, it works this way. E stands for energy and light, is equal to mass times the constant speed of light squared. The constant speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. So you take the mass times 186,000 miles per second, square that number, and that equals the energy that is in every atom, in every molecule, and everything that's matter. So just to give you an idea of how immense this energy is, the bomb that leveled Hiroshima, in it was 0.6 of a gram of material that actually was exploded, less than half of my fingernail. That, in that tiny little amount of matter, the whole area of Hiroshima was destroyed and leveled. That's how much light and energy is in matter. So science supports this idea of light and energy. Now, Buddha also talked about karma. Karma is simply whatever you do is going to come back to you. And Buddha taught that intention is karma. Let's say, for example, I saw this guy and I made friends with him. But I made friends with him because he was wealthy, and somehow I wanted to benefit from his wealth. My outward expression of love or how I treated him would be no different than if my intention toward him was altruistic, that I just really wanted to be his friend, that I liked him, I wanted to learn from him, I wanted to share life with him in some way, or be his friend, just hang out. But karma says that your intention is going to result in entirely different outcomes, even though your actions and words may not be discernibly different from those two scenarios. Karma dictates that your intention is going to yield a different outcome. So you can parallel that idea of karma when Jesus talks about committing adultery in your heart. If you lust after a woman, you commit adultery with her in your heart already, even without doing the deed. Because the first part of your reality starts here in your mind, in your consciousness. Jesus said that when he was eating, his disciples were eating and they did not wash, as was the custom of the Jews. And the Pharisees came down and said, "Why are you guys eating with unwashed hands?" Jesus said, "It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth. Because out of the mouth comes evil intentions, ideas of murder or robbery or theft or something like that. These are the things that defile a man." And so these teachings parallel this idea of karma that is prevalent in Eastern thought and in the teachings of Buddha. The best way I can sum up for you in a very short, concise way the common teachings of all these holy texts, because they're all taught in different ways. They all are different people seeing God from a different perspective in a different culture with different times, different moralities. And God is not knowable. Every holy text tells you that you cannot know God, that he is beyond knowing. He's beyond logic. He's something that you can't know. One of my teachers, Sheikh Abdullah Noordin Durki, who is a Sufi Muslim, he taught me this saying. He said, those who say they know, don't know. Those who say they don't know, know, because God is not knowable. So to say that you don't know means that you don't know, but that you do know that you don't know, right? All right, so the best way I can describe this order of things that is common in this short, concise time is that all is light. There's a light within me that causes consciousness. It's the same light, and my brother Lucas here, it's the light that vibrates. It's the thing that lets him know and be known, right? It's the seed, it's the father, it's the potential of creation. That somehow feeds into my consciousness, and my consciousness then is reflected back to me in this outer radiance. Not so much in a system of tests and punishments, but in a system of loving guidance from a father and a mother that loves me and is trying to lead me to the state of consciousness where I can reveal the ultimate good. Now, what is free will if there's not consequence? If I think thoughts or have this will that somehow is not benefiting, I've got to experience it if my will is free. There's got to be consequence for it. Let's get back to Irene for a minute. Marry these things that challenge you. Marry these things that make you afraid. Own them. If you own them and deal with them, they no longer own you. You own them. And if you remove this idea of good and evil, this is good, this is not so good, then you're able to look inside yourself and see possibly what the cause could be, right? You could see that this thing is reflecting back to me because of something I thought or because of something I did. Or it could be something that you should remove yourself from. So owning these things that conflict you and marrying them teaches us and leads us and guides us. If, just as another example, let's say you came home and found your wife in a precarious situation with another man. You could get angry, throw things, maybe shoot somebody. But if you stopped and just left and looked to yourself, why did this happen? Well, it could be because you were kissing some other girl, right? Or thinking about it. All these things are a reflection back to you. And they're either telling you you need to change something about your life or about your thinking or move away from something. The reason for the fall, according to our holy text, is because man ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, if you think for a minute what I'm telling you is true, that all this stuff is reflected back to you by a loving God to lead us and guide us, what does this knowledge of evil mean? Let's say I look at other religions and say that maybe my Muslim brothers are evil, right? Well, what happens is, because of this nature of our reality being reflected back to us because of something within us, then I suddenly see evil, right? I took a bite of that fruit, right? I separate myself from this aspect of God, which I think is everything. If I deem that my Muslim brothers are evil or that Buddhists are evil, then I separate myself from that aspect of God. Sin and evil separate you from God. Forgiveness of sin. The first side of the coin is that I see myself and God's grace and my sins being forgiven. And most people stop there, or some people stop there. The other side of the coin is that I also forgive as God has forgiven me, so I forgive everyone. I no longer see evil or sin in anyone. I only see cause and effect. So when you begin to think in these ways, when you think of the oneness of God, again, one side of the coin is people say, God, there is only one God, and this is true. But the oneness of God also means that he is in all, of all, and through all, and we have our being in him. The oneness of God, realizing the oneness of God, that's all there is. There is no independent being. There is no independent thing. There's nothing that exists outside of him. Everything exists under his will. Means that this commandment of not to judge is not something that you follow as a commandment because it's a commandment or a rule and you just do it. But because if you recognize that there is only God, how can you judge anything as evil or sinful? Because you can't do that with God. Now, the first question is going to come up, well, how about somebody who commits a crime? If somebody comes in here and shoots my buddy Les in the leg and steals from him and runs out the door, I could go to court and I could look at the law and I said, guys who come into church and shoot cameramen in the leg get this result, this consequence. I can do that according to our social mores and laws of today. But for me to say that this guy is evil, no, I can't do that. Because there's something in me that would have caused that to happen. That's how I see it. This concept of evil, when you take the brush of evil and paint it on something, you can't see behind that. Likewise, if you take the brush of good and paint it. If I say, gosh, I am good. I've got the good religion. I know it. This is all good. I can't see behind that, right? This concept of evil and good allows us to do horrible things that exist outside our teachings. We go to war. We're at war in the Middle East now because our president talked about an axis of evil. And because we paint that brush of evil on these things, we don't see behind it. And we paint a brush of good on our country and our government, which it is good, don't misunderstand me. But you don't see the cause and effect. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and yet 100,000 Iraqis are dead because of it. And we paint that situation as evil, and it allows people to move it. Jesus said that if evil overcomes evil for some perceived good, only evil wins. The only answer for hate is love. The only answer for war is peace. If you preach and talk about war and hate, you find war and hate. If you preach about love and forgiveness and peace, you find love, forgiveness, and peace. You find what you're looking for. There are only 3 false religions that I know of in this world. The first one is I know absolutely. I will assure you that I don't know absolutely. And the idea behind it is God's nature is so infinite and awesome that no one can know it. We don't have the capacity to know it. So if I say I know absolutely, I don't. The second false religion is me. God loves best those that look like me, think like me, same race as me, read the same holy book as me, understand it just like me. God loves those best just like me. That's the second false religion. The third false religion is mine. Mine is the chosen way, the only true way. Those are the 3 false religions. I haven't found any others other than that. And I've read a lot. The light of life is the light of God that comes through you. It's the seed of creation, the Father. It mixes and unites with your consciousness and is revealed in this radiance around you as your life. There's not one thing that needs to change in this outer world to bring you peace and happiness. The only thing that needs to change is the awareness in you that you are divine, that you have dominion over the entire creation. There's not one thing or one person that needs to change to make your life better, fuller, and brighter. The Christ said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He said that 2,000 years ago. I'm telling you the same thing. The kingdom of heaven is spread out before you, yet many men don't see. It is an awareness of your divine nature. It is awareness of the divine in everything that's around you. And it's an awareness that all you need to change is the awareness of who you are and who everyone else is. There is no thing that exists outside of God. The big thing that Muhammad taught was the oneness of God. And the oneness of God means that he's everything. And I remember these words from my youth. I am he as you are me, and we are all together. See how they run like pigs from a gun, see how they fly. I'm crying. Was John talking about the oneness of God? I think Lennon was hooked up, folks, just so you guys know. With that, I'm going to close this. Thank you all for the wonderful opportunity. Our mission of light and love continues. Blessings and peace to each one of you. And I'm going to bring our lovely Miss Zita back up. And thank you so much.